Hey everyone, I'm Will, and in this video I'm answering your questions. I quickly put the word out last night in my Facebook Academy group as well as here on YouTube just to see if you had any questions for me. So that's what we're going to tackle here today. It's quite a mixed bag of questions, so I hope you enjoy. And if you have any further questions, just leave them in the comment section below and I'll get back to you. All right, let's have a look. These are just completely random order, so we'll go into it now. Devon wants to know, how did I put together my first landscape photography workshop? That kind of happened organically when I first started out in my photography. Maybe after 12 months or so, I just had a few people approach me and ask if I taught. And naturally I said no at first. I hadn't even thought about doing that. I didn't even know what a workshop was. And then as time went on, I eventually kind of built up the courage and decided to go ahead and begin by teaching people one-on-one. And then eventually I started doing small groups, doing say sunset to stars is what I called it. So sunset leading into astrophotography. And then from there I started running multi-day workshops internationally. These days, the past few years, I'm completely based here in NZ and running either group workshops here, private workshops, and occasionally I'll go back to Australia and do some seascape workshops over there. But it all began just doing like a one-on-one for a couple of hours, and I remember being terrified, but it was so rewarding when I realized that I actually do have some knowledge here and value to give to this person, and seeing them, learn these things that maybe were bugging them for some time, that was incredibly rewarding. And that was kind of when I knew that, yes, I enjoy teaching and this is what I want to do. And it's been over a decade since that. Alexander Carlson, when you're alone in the wilderness, are you not afraid of wild animals? Have you encountered any predators? Well, thankfully here in NZ, there's not really any predators at all to worry about. The main thing you could ever encounter is really parrots, deer, which were introduced anyway, wild boars introduced as well. That's about all. I think the only thing I ever had once was I decided not to sleep in the tent one time. It was a clear night and I said, I'll just sleep out on the ground. And I was lying in the sleeping bag, and just as it was getting dark, it was in the summer, so it was still quite late, about 10 p.m. An owl came down and tried to swoop for me basically. I don't know what it was looking at, or if it was a bit perplexed by who I was. But that gave me a bit of a shock because of the talons coming straight at me it was quite dark, so it really gave me a bit of a fright. And then I could see in the distance it was swooping around, and I was quite awake after that. But look, otherwise there's not too much to worry about here. The main thing to worry about in the New Zealand landscape is the elements and being underprepared, because the weather can change very quick and you can, get yourself in a precarious position if you're not paying attention to the weather and just the terrain that you're out there walking in. Probably the biggest hazard is in the rainforest here. A lot of the undergrowth is so wet and boggy and damp, and between the tree roots a little false floor can be created with moss and leaves, and you can walk on that and then your foot will go straight between the roots of the tree, and you can do some damage pretty quickly. That's honestly probably the biggest hazard in my opinion. Jord Hoare, did you shoot with other systems before Sony? Do you think you'll live in Te Anau long term? I started using a Canon camera back in the day, and then when Sony released the first A7R, at the time it was the world's first full-frame mirrorless camera, I was at a point with the Canon gear where I felt limited, and I was looking at what Nikon had in their sensors and was really keen to go over there. But at the time, I couldn't really justify the cost of changing out the entire lineup. When Sony released the A7R, it was essentially the same sensor that was in the Nikon D800 cameras. And the beauty was that you could get an adapter and put your Canon glass straight onto this Sony body. So that's what I did. It was a much cheaper thing for me to do, to just buy that body and keep my existing Canon gear. And then as the years rolled on, there was really no need to leave Sony, because they kept on, upgrading the bodies as they do every 2 years or so. Thankfully now we live in a time where every brand has great cameras. Through running workshops, I get to handle all the different models, all the different brands, and it's just a good time to be a photographer. So I have no personal loyalty or affiliation with Sony, and look, I'd happily pick up the Canon R5, for example, and start shooting with that, the Nikon Z8, Z9, so on and so forth. But I have been using Sony now for 10 years, but whatever. Camera gear they're just tools. Whatever tool is going to help us do the job, that's all that matters. When it comes to living here in Tiana, down in the South Island, look, this is home. I've lived here 7 years now. This is where my kids have been raised. They've spent most of their lives here. There's no place on earth that feels more like home to me than where I am now. So absolutely, the move to New Zealand from Australia was done out of a calling, a deep calling. It just felt like home here before it even became home. So now that we are here, it's hard to envision being anywhere else. So yeah, there's no plan to ever leave here. Of course, we don't know what the future holds for any of us, but yeah, this is home, mate, for sure. Okay, Windelman, when you shoot woodland handheld, do you shoot at your lowest f-stop to keep your ISO under 640? His lowest f-stop is f4, and even with a low shutter speed and f4, my screen seems very dark at ISO 640. I have an A7R3. The only time I ever really get away from ISO 100 or 200 is in these forest scenes, because yes, they are quite dark, obviously. And that's where I just typically go straight to ISO 640, because the camera noise at 640 is almost the same at 320 and 400. So it makes sense to just go straight to 640 on the camera that I'm shooting. Personally, I don't have to really manipulate the other settings too much. F8 on a wide angle will often get everything sharp anyway. So I'd get off F11, maybe go down to F8. That's going to let more light in. And then, but I can shoot handheld relatively slow, a quarter of a second, 0.4 seconds, even 1 second. If I'm seated and leaning up against a tree or something, no problem at all. So I'm assuming that maybe you're not able to get your shutter speed as slow as what I can do. So that's where you'll either need to, do a bit more practice, or lower the f-stop and focus stack, or just get the tripod out and use the tripod. But yeah, I don't personally have a problem there, and I definitely don't have to lower the f-stop down like that low, that's for sure. The other tip I'll say is just try to shoot those scenes when there's more light. Don't go in the late afternoon or early morning. Wait when there's just more ambient light, obviously not direct light, but just brighter light in general. That could help you out. Okay, what's your favorite pie from Miles Pies? That's quite a famous pie shop where I live. I don't eat pies actually, so I can't answer that one, but my kids love them. Mince and cheese is what the kids love. Best sandfly repellent? I'm going to let you down again. Don't use any. Just let them bite you. Just be one in the environment with them. I've got an immunity now, so although they will bite me, and yes, they can irritate you while they're trying to do that, I don't get an itch or anything the next day. I used to years ago and not anymore. So look, I don't use repellent. I just cover up, long sleeves, long pants, and yeah. When it comes to the repellent, obviously clients coming over for workshops, people are using different stuff. I don't know what really works and what doesn't, but yeah, personally, I just don't use any. And have I ever put an old manual lens on the camera? No, I haven't. Once upon a time, I had a Zeiss 21mm prime, and I think that was manual focus only. Nice and sharp, but no, I've never really bothered putting old lenses on the camera, especially the sensor I'm using. I don't know if there'll be any benefit to that. Thanks for the questions, mate. What's the slowest shutter speed you can do handheld with the R5, with the IBIS? Depends on your focal length, first and foremost. What you can do on a long telephoto is going to be different to, say, 12 or 16 mil. So the wider we are, the slower you can obviously shoot and avoid any kind of movement or shake. At 12 to 16 mil, or even let's say 12 to 24 mil, that real wide range, no problem shooting up to a second. And when I'm going a second handheld, definitely would be making sure I'm very steady. Now, saying that, just the other day, I did some 2-second exposures and they'll tack sharp all the way through. So it depends on your body position. Are you standing? Are you sitting? Are you leaning up against something? So these are all factors that come into play. The real safe, easy zone for me is definitely 1/5, 1/4. They're just no-brainers. It's almost 100% success rate there. And then going below that, we'll just factor in the focal range, obviously, but how I'm positioned and everything like that. I have noticed quite a difference from the R5 to the R3 and the R4. Just that extra stabilization for someone like me is gold. It just means that I can do that quarter of a second, 0.3 seconds without having to really, concentrate and think about it. The success rate is, like I said, almost 100%. Okay, this one says, what are your favorite 10 shots you've made over the years? I can't answer that one. It's way too hard because, you know, in the portfolio alone, I've got a few hundred images and all of them somewhat mean something to me, mainly through the memories that are evoked. So I won't go into that in this segment. Let's do that in another video. But the other question is, you shoot a lot of mountains and waterfalls. Are these your favorite subjects, or is it something else like seascapes? Look, it's where I live here, like Fiordland, we have the lush rainforest, you've got the snowy glaciated mountains, but there's also coastal environments as well. That's what the fjords are. So if I'm going to answer it a little bit cheeky, I'm going to say, you know, my favorite subject is all of it combined into one frame, which I do have some images of. And I was even just out in the remote fjords recently on one of my charter expeditions. And yeah, you can have images where you have lush ferns in your foreground, the ocean in the back, and then the mountains, you know, beyond there. It's just incredible. I'd find it really hard to sum up and say what is my one favorite subject to shoot, because I just love all these different subjects for different reasons. I love the power and majesty of the mountains and how they just make you stand there in reverence and awe. I love the calmness of the forest, and you can just get lost for hours in the rainforest, and even if you don't get a single image, you just have a good time anyway. And then seascapes always will feel like home to me because my photography journey began on the coastal shorelines of Australia. So it's hard to just say one in particular, but I guess, look, if looking at my portfolio, you can see what my favorite subjects are. Like you said, it's all of the above: waterfalls, forests, mountains. Hard to single out one. So let's just say I love all of them basically, and trying to get them all together. All right, Sam says, bucket list locations for Australia, New Zealand, and the rest of the world. This is probably a disappointing answer for people, but I don't really have aspirations to be a world traveller. I've done a lot of travel over the years. I used to run workshops overseas, and my passion is for here in the South Island. The South Island has enough to keep any photographer stimulated, especially if you're willing to reach these wild areas. And if I had time and budget, where would I go? I'll just keep getting out there here, because a lot of this stuff that I really enjoy experiencing and capturing here and working with, it's just hard to access. It just takes time. It can take money if you need to use a boat or a heli or something like that. So bucket list, there's really no one place aside from more time out here, the southwest corner of the South Island. It truly has just about everything that I would want to photograph. The only thing it really wouldn't have, like necessarily when it comes to nature, is say something like big sand dunes. There are small sand dunes, but aside from that, the rainforests, the waterfalls, the mountains, the seascapes, it just goes on and on. Glaciers. So this is bucket list for me, and yeah, there's not really anywhere that is calling me. I'm just so compelled to be here, and I like focusing my career and my imagery in one area. I think it would be strange if suddenly I just went and photographed a random part of the world. I don't see how that would fit into my existing body of work, because for the last 7-8 years, everything I've really photographed has pretty much been here in the southwest, Te Wāhi Pounamu. That's that southwest corner of the South Island, and yeah, I'm happy with basing my work here and spending my time here, and I just feel like I've barely scratched the surface. So Jared says, how do you stay true to yourself in your photography and keep on the path and vision that you have without falling into the trap of imposter syndrome or trends just to stay relevant? Look, like most of you guys, photography has completely changed my life. It's enriched my life in so many ways, and you know, when I look back at the early years of my photography into now, there's definitely been a progression and a change a little bit as that time has gone on. I feel like you naturally know with your art, your outlet, what it is you enjoy most. And it's fine to try and experiment and do different things, but inevitably you end up at a certain point after a while where you know, yes, this is what I enjoy doing. And the tricky thing is, if you're doing it from a business perspective, you have to walk that delicate line of, yeah, okay, being able to just express and do what you want to do, but then if you're putting food on the table with your art, it is that fine balance. And for me, I always just said photography is too special to me I don't want to lose my love for it just to pay the bills. I would rather do a different career or go and do a different job. So that's kind of the line that I've always walked. I've always said, if I feel like I'm getting pulled too far away from my love and passion and the freedom that it gives me emotionally and spiritually and everything like that, the photography, if I'm getting pulled away from that side of it, then I'd rather stop and not go down that path. An example is many years ago, I had like influencer work. This is going back a long time, but you know, traveling around the world to some pretty amazing places and being able to photograph these places in exchange for sharing the images on social media and sharing the work with tourism boards and things like that. But doing those jobs, I'd often be in scenarios where I just didn't have an emotional connection to the landscape. I didn't really necessarily want to photograph that area for whatever reason, just a variety of factors, but I had no choice. I kind of had to. And I remember after doing that for a couple of years, certain jobs like that, I did say, look, I don't want to do this stuff anymore because I feel like my work is getting divided here and my love and enjoyment of the whole process is starting to dwindle. So you just need to stay true to yourself, really. And I think it helps just to check in with yourself, where you're at with your photography. Am I doing this because I think I should be, or am I doing this because I really enjoy it? And I think the biggest thing here, Jared, it's that illusionary pressure that social media can put on photographers, whether you're doing it full-time, part-time, or just as a hobbyist. There's this illusion that you need to share, you need to do this, you have to post, you got to stay, and that's just fake. You know, that is just this algorithmic beast which is purely there to get eyes on the screen as long as possible. And if you can free yourself from that, and I believe you have because I know you and you've done workshops with me, that's probably the best state to be in, to not feel tied down to the pressures of social media or photography groups or anything like that. That's where you'll truly be able to, you know, stay true to your art and your passion and do it for the right motives. And it is a delicate balance, especially someone like me doing it as a career. You have to walk that balance of putting food on the table, but also staying true to yourself and your artwork. And it's certainly not for everyone to try and do it full time or anything like that. So I think time in nature and away from the screens keeps reinforcing why we do what we do, and that helps you stay on the path that you're on and not, you know, second guess things or get drawn away. So I hope that answer made sense. I don't know if it did, but thanks for the question. Do I think there's a benefit in entering photography competitions? That's by Kylie. I would say 90% no. I don't think there is much benefit, really. I'm going to be blunt here, and this is not an attack on any competition out there, anyone or anything like that. But look, photography competitions at most are just a business, and it's a way to make money. And what do you get from entering a photography competition depends on the comp. So some comps, I'm assuming, are going to be far better than others because they might give you critique and feedback. That is valuable. If you want critique and feedback, approach the photographer you look up to. Approach them directly, and I'm sure a lot will be happy to help you out one-on-one with some mentoring, with some teaching. When you enter a competition, there's various judges, and from having judge competitions, you don't often get much time. You got hundreds of images to look over. You know, the best benefit you can get is to work directly one-on-one with people you look up to. Do you really want feedback from a judge who you haven't even heard of, and maybe you don't even like their work, or maybe their work is just completely different to what you like to do? I don't know if there's much benefit in that, let alone paying to just, you know, get a score or get no response or anything. So again, I'm not picking on a particular competition, but I would say save your money, put that money aside. Instead of entering comps, just go directly to people that you actually look up to and see if you can maybe work with them one-on-one. An hour with a professional whose work you really like is going to give you way more benefit. Okay, confused about Lightroom and Photoshop. I hear a lot about the flow between the two. If one is using Photoshop, is there really a need for Lightroom? Absolutely not. I only use Photoshop. I don't have Lightroom installed. Photoshop, when you give Photoshop a RAW file, Adobe Camera Raw comes up. Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom are almost identical. So yes, if you have Photoshop installed and you know how to use ACR, Camera Raw, like I use it, no, you don't need Lightroom at all. There's no right or wrong, just whatever works for you. Thankfully for me, I only need Photoshop because of ACR, but from a teaching standpoint, because ACR is just like Lightroom, I can easily teach and use either program. So yeah, if I was you, mate, just stick with Photoshop and off you go. And that's what happened with me over 12 years ago. I didn't want to learn two programs, so I just learned Photoshop, which had no limitations. And then I've never needed Lightroom ever since. Lightroom has limitations, especially back then, it had a lot more limitations. So I didn't see the point in, especially back in those days, you had to buy the two separate products. I just figured I'd buy one and be done with it. So that's the path that I went down. Ronan wants to know about the weight of camping, and he says it's hard to keep the weight down when you add food, stove, tent, water, camera gear. What's your kit composition and end weight when you're out for those overnights or multi-days? Ronan, I wish I was, I wish I could say, look, I've got this specific weight I aim for and this is how I get there. Sorry, man, I'm rough. You just pack that bag and it's heavy and it's just too bad, isn't it? It sucks. The only thing I'll say though is obviously, and I'm sure you're probably the same anyway, buying reputable gear, lightweight gear, it all helps keep that pack weight down. So buying good sleeping bag, lightweight tent, so on and so forth. But once we add that camera gear in, forget it. Like you said, the weight just goes up, and then the food. It's just what it is. So I guess the only way I keep the weight down is, one, with the gear, I say, do I really need the long lens, for example? So sometimes I'll leave the 100 to 400 behind. The other way is with the food, I just try and really think about every meal and think, all right, how many days I'm going to be out there, and then just be very strict with how much food I bring in. But you always want to bring a bit extra anyway for safety. So look, mate, unfortunately, no end weight. It is what it is, right? It's a heavy bag and that's it. Okay. We've got a question here by Iona. She's talking about the desert in Australia and what would the main subject be. And she's talking about, once you get away from the main icons, Uluru, for example, there's no real main subject except the red earth, some bushes, perhaps the road. How do I approach it? Because I talk about creating depth and having a main subject and layering. What do you do in the middle of the desert? I would probably be looking more now at the intimate side of the landscape. I probably wouldn't necessarily bother getting the sky. I'd be more looking down at those beautiful, intimate, intricate details that you will find out there. The little patterns in the sand, maybe the sparkle of the sand when the sun hits it. You mentioned about the odd bush here and there, like plants, little flowers. Focus on them, 24 to 70 or even a 70 to 200 type lens, and just go for those intimate details. And that's really fun and enjoyable, and it's completely endless. So just keep that in mind. Definitely look at that. You'll still be using leading lines and contrast, a main subject, but just focus down, look down at those finer details. Okay, a question about ND filters. What are the ND filters for? She doesn't have much experience with long exposures. ND filters are like putting sunglasses on your lens. By doing that, you're tricking the camera into thinking the scene is darker, which allows you to get a slower shutter. So it's only beneficial if you want to shoot longer exposures. Now, when would we want to do that? Maybe it's midday and you want to streak water. You can't get that slow shutter because the light's too harsh. When you put the ND filter on, the camera thinks it's darker, now we can slow it down. I don't personally use any NDs at all because I shoot when the light is low and soft, and I can get around not having to do it. So I don't know if you have NDs at all. I would say just hold off for now. The question mentions seascapes and waterfalls. Again, just do that in the golden hours when the light is softer, and you'll find that, especially if you're shooting around f11, f16, not much light is coming in and you can get a slow enough shutter to streak the water and get a nice texture. You're not going to get 5-8 second exposures. that's where you need ND if you really want to go long. But I personally don't like that look on the water. I prefer for some texture to be in the water. So for that reason, I don't use ND filters. All right, Sarah says, what are the best camera settings for taking photos in the snow? Any tips and tricks? Look, when you're in the snow, a lot of people ask this about snow. It's just like any other scene. All we're doing is looking at our histogram and making sure we're collecting the right data. We don't want to blow out the highlights, and that's the goal at the end of the day. So when it comes to settings, just keep looking at the histogram. It's just like a seascape, a tree, a mountain. ISO, we want that low for the noise. The f-stop is for our depth of field, and then the shutter speed we set accordingly to control how much light is coming in and out. All I'll say about snow directly is if you're going to try to photograph snow at midday, it's probably a bad idea because it's going to be very bright and it just won't look nice. But that's the same for a waterfall too. Midday light hitting a waterfall doesn't look good either. So look, when it comes to snow, just treat it like any other subject. Go when the light is good in the golden hours. Keep an eye on the histogram and you should be good to go. The other thing though as well, with snow, look at the intimate details. Like I said with the other answer about the desert, look down at patterns and textures and you might find some fun stuff as well as the big grand landscape scene. Kylie, what time of year do I recommend getting best light, best weather chances on the lower half of the South Island? Well, that's where I live. You're asking the right person. The light at this latitude is nice and low and soft in autumn and winter, like most places around the world. So definitely autumn and winter has lower light. So you're getting more photogenic light throughout the day. When it comes to the weather, the South Island, it's an island sitting out here in the ocean. So the weather can just change very quickly. There's no rhyme or reason. We could get a snowstorm in spring. You could get snow in summer. You could get rain at any time. Anything can happen, or you could get a run of 2 weeks of blue sky days. It's completely random. So I'll just say come in the autumn and winter. That's when the light is going to be lower, at least the sun, and you just get what you get basically. All right, so I just finished packing up and then Tim sent through a few questions, and they're good questions, so I'm going to answer these as well. The first one is combining multiple images, not stitching, cheating? It's a great question, mate. Now, I think the first easy answer is cheating can only exist when there are clearly defined rules to play by. And of course, the beautiful thing about art is there are no rules. It's just self-expression. And this goes across all the arts, whether it's music, visual arts, cooking, dancing, you name it. Now, if there's clearly defined rules, say competition, and you choose to break those rules, maybe the competition says single exposures only, you enter something that has 2 exposures combined, okay, you're now cheating. When it comes to, just photography in general, then we're all obviously able to create what we like. Some people might want to take a foreground from one location, put it in the background of another spot and do a composite, for example. And the list goes on and on the ways that you can create a photograph. For me, I'd say probably 90% of my work is single exposure. That last 10% could be where I've blended a wave from one frame into a frame that was shot 60 seconds later. So maybe I've got a crashing wave here and then there was a crashing wave there in the frame and put it together. It could be a sky exposure, so maybe I replaced a clear sky and put in some appropriate clouds to fill the frame, whatever it is, right? But without a doubt, that 90% or so that I said is single exposure. To me, that is the most rewarding thing, to just walk out, click and get it. But even a lot of those single exposures still need a lot of work in post because maybe I'm shooting straight at the sun. And there's people that would say, well, that's cheating, you shouldn't even use processing, right? The list goes on in the ways that people think that you can cheat in photography. Again, you can only cheat when there's rules to play by. All I can say really probably in regards to this thing, because it's something that we all have to kind of approach as individuals that enjoy photography, is where do we draw the line? What are we comfortable doing? As a musician, are you comfortable using digital backing tracks for certain instruments? Or as a chef in the kitchen, are you happy purchasing some ingredients which are pre-made for you, or do you have to create everything from scratch, right? We all have to decide what we're comfortable doing. My answer is basically free yourself from any preconceived ideas about what photography is or should be or was, and purely do what feels natural to you. And that's all I'll say on that. And don't worry about what other people are doing. Don't worry if someone's used AI to create something, or they've blended this, or they've done that. I think for me, I realized a few years ago that I want to, first and foremost, have the experience in nature. If I don't have a good experience out there, then I'm not going to photograph it. And then the photograph is my interpretation of that literal place. So that's a rule that I've created for myself. Literal places that I can take people to and experience themselves. That's kind of the rules that I play by. They're real places, and you could go there next week and look at the same permanent subject matter, the same tree, the same mountain. When it comes to the processing, your question about combining multiple images, I approach my photography like a painter would approach a scene. I have some friends who are just world-class oil painters, and they'll go out on location and they'll do a plein air painting, and they'll stand at this location for 2 hours, and they will paint what they're kind of watching and observing across that 2-hour window. Obviously the light's changing, there's lots going on, cloud coming in and out. Then they'll take reference images on their phone, photograph the rocks, the mountain. Then they'll go home to the studio, and if they really enjoyed the place and they had a good experience and they've got a solid plein air reference there, they might decide then to paint that huge in the studio across 6 to 12 weeks. And the final result, it might not have been exactly what the eye was looking at. How could it be? Because it's derived from an experience as well as a reference that was created across, multiple minutes, hours. But when I look at the painting, the final result, I don't ask myself, did the artist see that himself? Or all I want to achieve is an emotional response. And when I look at the painting, I'll either go, wow, that's beautiful, or I won't. And with photography, I guess I want that same approach there. I just want people to look at the work and go, wow, and feel something. And the only rule that I really play by is this is a real place, and I stood at that place. And hopefully I can achieve that in a single exposure, and most of the time I can. Sometimes I can't, but that's what it is. And I just hope that people can look and appreciate that real place, and this is my interpretation of my experience there. So anyway, long-winded answer, mate, but hopefully that made sense. The other one says, how often per month do you get out shooting? I'd probably be out, got to remember I'm teaching a lot, so I'm running multi-day workshops, private workshops, so in that regard I'm out with the camera a lot because I'm with my client, teaching, showing, shooting together. So if you combine that with YouTube and then going out just for myself, potentially out in the field 20 plus days a month. It's hard to really dial that down, but yeah, easily 20 days a month. Sometimes more than that, sometimes a little bit less, but that gives you a bit of an overview. The probably better question is, how often am I just shooting with no intentions, no videos, no tutorials, not teaching? That's where it gets a lot less, and that's a hard balancing act. It's that work-life balance, and photography is still a passion and hobby of mine as well as a career, so that's where maybe for me going out shooting for myself is 7 days a month. It's hard to say, but yeah, it's not as high as all those. By the time you combine the other aspects, that's where it ends up being a lot of time in the field, which I'm really thankful for. Do you ever get back to Oz to shoot? Usually once a year at the moment, so I head back soon in July. I'll be running some seascape workshops over there. I've got 3 workshops, they're all back to back, and looking forward to doing those, and then a chance to catch up with family as well. How do you deal with customers who might have a significant different way of doing this to you? So he's referring to there, I guess, maybe my approach or the techniques or something like that. Look, as a workshop host, I'm also a guide, so I'm taking people out into these beautiful areas that I've helped, that I've discovered, and I'm saving them the effort of having to find these places themselves and be there at the right time. A lot of people will still use a tripod, and I recommend they use it if they're not comfortable being handheld. Some people will be doing composites. They might want to get a sky from a different day and put it in that one and do a blue hour blend or whatever it is. And then there's other people using maybe filters, doing really long exposure, all different approaches. It's completely fine. I want to see that. I enjoy it. Even compositionally, sometimes, you know, I can teach how I would compose a scene, but some people just prefer a more minimalist approach. There's no right or wrong. It's all art. I'm happy for my job to also be the guide and to share these places with people. The photography is just another aspect of that whole bigger equation there. But I feel like we can all feed off each other, and there's still always valuable insights to provide as well. So there's not one right or wrong way to do things, and it's a joy to, you know, be able to share what I do with people, even if they have a different approach to me when it comes to the creative and technical side of things. And there's one more that I've caught late from Flora Fauna channel. There's quite a few questions in this one. So they say, why do many photographers delete EXIF data? I have no idea. I don't know if I am either. It's potentially a default setting. I'm not completely sure. What is the overall optimal resolution for posting photos on different sites? I do 1500 pixels on the longest edge. It looks good on the website, social media. It's big enough to hold the detail, but not so large that people can steal it and do anything significant with it. That's why I do that. How do you avoid glare when shooting backlight? That's all about the angle the sun is hitting your lens, and particularly, you know, on that side angle, that's where you can get a bad flare. It depends on the lens as well. So the only real way to get around it is tweak your composition slightly, or maybe hold your hand out and block the sun with your hand so it's not hitting the front of the lens. A little bit of a tricky one. Does a landscape photographer need fast optics? Not really. Fast optics meaning apertures that can open wide? No, not necessarily, unless you're right into astro. That can be handy, but for me, f2.8 with astro is more than fine, so that's the widest aperture that I have. Is it worth buying a medium format camera for the sake of a wider dynamic range, or will the difference with full frame cameras be not great? I don't think there's many medium formats that have a bigger dynamic range than what we have in the full frame, around 15 and a half stops. So no, the answer is no, there's no benefit really in that regard. Why do I use a regular lanyard on the camera instead of a special strap? So this is probably not a regular lanyard, it's a shoelace. I don't like the big clunky straps that come with the cameras. I just think they look a bit dorky and they're just ugly and too big. I don't like lots of strap hanging off. It gets in the way. Remember, I'm shooting handheld a lot, so I don't want a big strap getting in the way all the time. But the reason why I've ended up with this is I remember going to do aerials years ago because I would just have no straps, and then yeah, we had the doors off on the helicopter, and one of the requirements is obviously for safety to have a strap. So at the time I just didn't have anything, so I was like, hang on, I'll just pull a shoelace off my boot, and it stayed on ever since. So now on the other body that I've got, I just have the same, just 2 bootlaces. That just gives me something for aerials, obviously, but also just if I'm out in a precarious position, it's nice to have the peace of mind, but it's not big and cumbersome. So that's why I use that. Favorite time of year for landscapes? Probably autumn and winter. The light is just lower, more atmosphere. So you got that softer light all day, and it's quieter. It's just my preferred time. Snow on the mountains, so on and so forth. Why do you only photograph nature? Are there other genres not at all interesting, or do you understand that you need to focus on one thing? I photograph nature because I'm just compelled to photograph nature. That's where my deepest connections are, and that's where I feel compelled to express. I photograph people, but it's my family and friends, and I don't feel a need to share that work at all. But my most enjoyment comes from photographing nature. Favorite music genre? Metalcore. I like heavy music, but I love a broad range of different styles. And then the last one, Angela says, why haven't you published a book with your favorite photos? Well, I'll tell you now, that's what I'm working on the next 12 months. That's why I'm not sharing too much new photographs on the channel, okay? So we'll just keep that under wraps, but yeah, that's where my head's at for the next 12 months. All right, that's it for some of the questions here on this particular video, but we'll do this again in a couple of months' time. Sorry I couldn't get to all of them. Some of them went a bit too specific in certain things, and I didn't want to, you know, drag the answer out for too long, but I'll definitely keep the rest in mind. And like I said, we'll do it again soon. Thanks for checking out the video this week, and I hope to see you in another video soon.